The NBA playoffs have arrived, and the best odds on basketball are on Novig. Stop paying sportsbook fees and start making your predictions on America's #1 trading app. Check out Novig and use code WOJ to get $50 worth of Novig coins when you spend your first $5. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older to play. Please play responsibly.
So it's always interesting. You see it now between San Antonio and New York. The one team is, just like you said, built through the trade and free agency, and the other one is built through the draft. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way. Again, it's just kind of the reality of the situation you're in.
Welcome into Jeff Peterson, the president of basketball operations with the Charlotte Hornets. Jeff, man, great to see you. Busy time of year. I appreciate you taking a few minutes out on the program.
No, of course, Adrian. I really appreciate you having me and thinking of me to be able to join the show, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely, Jeff. Let's start here. It's June. The draft is weeks away. Free agency is just a little further away, and trade season, that's the one thing you can't act on right now. When you're balancing your time this time of year and trying to figure out where you need to be investing every day, is this probably the most challenging period of the year? You've got draft workouts, you're taking calls, you're making calls on the trade market, and of course, you're trying to anticipate free agency all at once.
Absolutely. It is, I think, this time of year, it's so important to, be very intentional with your time and being disciplined, because to your point, you have all those, variables that you're trying to juggle, but you also have some staffing elements. You may have some media obligations. You have maybe your personal family life, things that you got to try to continue to make sure you're not falling behind in those spaces as well. But it is a challenge, but thankfully I have a tremendous staff that helps me, stay on task. And again, you're trying to essentially segment your day in terms of, okay, I'm going to spend X amount of hours on the draft today, and then, the rest of the day I'm going to spend on free agency. There could be a trade possibility that, we have certain targets and stuff that may pop up. So, I think that the biggest thing is if you're not structured or disciplined, it can kind of drive you wild, because there's so much information that's coming to you, on a given day that you're trying to manage.
You mentioned trade conversations, Jeff, and I think what was always very interesting to me was how long a conversation between two teams might have gone to do a trade. And I think sometimes people think, now, they also can come up very quickly, and I know that's happened with you, but that a conversation can evolve over 2 years, a full year, 6 months. Has that largely been your experience about eventually getting to a deal that sometimes this just plays out over a very long period of time?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Of course, you do have some of the situations that may be more from an outlier standpoint that, it goes on a couple weeks or something, and then, a team decides to pull a trigger. But yeah, to your point, these things, it's a constant flow of, again, information and communication, pattern standpoint that you're trying to, figure out the cadence of the other GM that you're working with or the other team. I've seen it plenty of times where you think you're at the finish line, and then, maybe this GM says, you know what, actually, I'm not comfortable right now. Let's just kind of table the conversation. So, look, it can be frustrating at times. It can be exciting. While you're doing all that, you're trying to manage, other parties that may be involved in those conversations, whether it's, your own front office staff, your coaching staff, of course, the ownership group, just trying to manage expectations from that standpoint. But, Absolutely. I've been a part of trade conversations that have literally, gone on for a year. And then you end up getting something done, and it's, some iteration of the initial conversation that took place. But I've also been on the other side where it's going on for a very long time, and then you don't get anything done. So I think it's important to know kind of your audience and who you're negotiating with, and again, like I said, I think the biggest thing is just being able to manage expectations, really internally, from that standpoint.
How important, Jeff, is it to learn the cadence over time of other GMs and other organizations and how they operate? It's no accident sometimes that you see deals get done among the same teams. I think there was a stretch of time Kobe Altman in Cleveland and Justin Zanuck in Utah. They just got a lot of deals done together, and that having relationships and a trust and maybe a more of a shorthanded conversation is an advantage, because the last thing you want to do is waste a lot of time and energy on things that may never get done.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. Look, to make a trade, it's very challenging. I think earlier, sometimes I think the fans think it's just, you pick up the phone, hey, we want to get a deal done, but it's far more nuanced than that, as you could imagine. But I think, you bring up a tremendous point in that relationships, that's the foundation of really everything we do, but especially if you want to, try to get a deal done. And, when you have a close relationship with another GM, or a respectable relationship with another GM, it's never one of those things where, we're trying to get over on one another. At the end of the day, you want to do a fair deal for both sides. And it's probably going to hurt a little bit, on both sides, because you think either you're giving up a really good player or you're giving up, some valuable assets or whatever it may be. So I think, to me, those are when the deals that you feel best about, like, both sides should hurt a little bit, and they're challenging. But I think, again, you go back to that relationship question, and I think it couldn't be further from the truth in terms of just how that factors into deal making.
The new collective bargaining agreement, you're a couple years into it now. I think everybody had some theories about how it might affect deal making, roster building. How different has it been in practice than maybe what you all imagined it was going to be?
Yeah, I think the league did a tremendous job in terms of when they wanted to implement these rules, and to try to, I think, create a little bit more parity amongst the league. And you see it up close and personal, that it's just very restrictive. There's different constraints in terms of, like, how much money you can take back, or sometimes, if you're in the second apron, your pick may be frozen, which, in theory, just gives teams maybe a little bit more hesitation or extra pause in terms of, if we go do this deal, like, the ramifications are going to be probably much more punitive than they would have been previously versus what they're going to be now going forward. So it is certainly, I think, has caused several teams to pause. But then you also get a team like, I'll give credit to Boston and Brad and those guys for the job that they did. They had some constraints last year, and they were able to kind of spin out of it, and they still had a tremendous season. So there are ways to get out of it, but again, it's no longer as easy as it used to be.
The thing too, Jeff, when you start to look at how to build an NBA team in this era, how different is it for, say, the Charlotte Hornets? You look at the Knicks roster and the group that they've, by the time people see this, maybe they've won a championship. They're on the brink of a championship, but certainly, they've largely done it through trade and free agency. Trading for star players and then knowing they had the confidence, the relationships, the belief that they could re-sign those players, right? And OG Anunoby, obviously Jalen Brunson was free agency. Karl Anthony Towns was a trade. Josh Hart was a trade. How different it might be to try to build in New York versus build in Charlotte. You have to look at it differently in a smaller, what's considered quote unquote a non-destination market. And there's only, I don't know, are there 3 destination markets, 4, 5, maybe? You could probably argue that how many there really are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's another really, really good point. I think the first thing too is embracing the market that you're in and embracing the reality of the situation. To your point, I think if all is equal, there's probably a large group of people or players that would want to be in New York, not just the Knicks, but just want to be in New York versus Charlotte. But then, there's also some guys who may like the Charlotte lifestyle, and it's a little bit slower. And I'm biased now, but it's a tremendous place to be and to raise a family, and got everything you need here. So, but I think again, once you embrace that and understand that yes, we may not. Charlotte may not be for everyone, right? And you can't take that personal, but it's how can we at the end of the day, how can we still continue to put the best players out there on the court? So yeah, we've obviously built through the draft. Historically, Charlotte, way back, was one of the best franchises and led the league in attendance for, I think it was like 8 or 9 straight years. And since time has passed, I would say it's still more of a destination that, again, you got to build through the draft and versus a team like New York. So it's always interesting. You see it now between San Antonio and New York. The one team is, just like you said, built through the trade and free agency, and the other one is built through the draft. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way. Again, it's just kind of the reality of the situation you're in. And, it's also now with these new lottery reform rules, it's going to make it a little bit more challenging to build through the draft. So that's, again, I got a tremendous group here with me in Charlotte, and, we're looking at 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road, right, in terms of just maybe the consequences, of what was not the reality in the past. But now that these rules have changed, we got to figure out how to adapt, and there's no question that we will.
The NBA playoffs have arrived, and the best odds on basketball are on Novig. Stop paying sportsbook fees and start making your predictions on America's #1 trading app. Check out Novig and use code WOJ to get $50 worth of Novig coins when you spend your first $5. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older to play. Please play responsibly. You mentioned the lottery reform, Jeff, and one thing I'm curious about is when people might see a bigger trade, a big name player, and there's a couple maybe who are on the market this summer, that I wonder if the draft compensation that people are used to seeing, the Knicks have, Mikal Bridges, right? 5 picks and a variation pick. Not every pick's the same. They're not all valued the same. That because those lottery picks might or the fact that picks can jump now, they're mathematically likely to jump, and that having more of them is probably not going to be the way it's going to go in some of these trades. That teams are going to value them more, and you may not get as many, right? Because the flattening of the odds makes it less likely that those are going to all be high picks.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, previously the worst place that you would want to be, at least from my perspective, is in the middle, because it's not like you're truly contending in the playoffs, and then you're not low enough, and from an odds standpoint to maybe realize a top 1 or 2 pick. And yes, of course, you can find talent all over the draft. There's plenty of examples, but historically, the likelihood of getting a player that can change the complexion of your franchise is found at the top of the draft. But now that's not going to be the case anymore from the standpoint of how the odds have shifted. So now being in the middle is actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, I think we're all striving to win a championship, right? And continue to get to that point and contend and home court advantage in the playoffs, whatever it may be. But at the same time, now if you're, of course you don't want to be in the bottom three, just the draft relegation zone. But if you're somewhere in that, in that middle, there's a world where you do end up receiving a top pick. And to your point, I think teams are still trying to figure out a little bit how to value those picks, especially out in the future, because with these new rules, it's there's a sunset period. So in three years, we're gonna take a look at it and see what's worked and what hasn't. But yeah, I think there's going to be a shift in terms of certainly quantity. And then even, you're making a trade now with like a team who's maybe projected to be in the middle. That team now may be a little bit more hesitant to give up their picks because, yeah, there's a world where that pick could end up being a top 2 or 3 pick. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out over these next few years. But again, like anything else, there's some really smart people in the league and the NBA that I think we'll be able to adapt to.
Jeff, when you are in a smaller market, and listen, it's just a fact. If you're in LA or New York or Miami has shown in the Pat Riley area that they can be that. That it's just harder to acquire star players. And in this league, historically, like they sort of find their way. They have found their way to the Lakers, in different iterations. Does this ultimately make it harder for small market teams to get franchise players?
Yeah, I think yes. I think in a vacuum, in my opinion, it does make it a bit more challenging. It's hard to, I think, the hardest part, again, previously you could go to your owner and say, listen, our plan, the path is to build through the draft. And that's how we're going to acquire our star player. I don't know if that's necessarily a plan moving forward. Again, you're certainly going to continue to take swings in the draft, but it's not like you can just bottom out because of the new rules. So that part is going to make it challenging for sure. So I think what you'll see is, again, if you're in a smaller market, you may have to trade for a star player. And, just obviously you're making a bet and you're going to give up picks and maybe a player or two. And you're just going to want that star player, of course, who wants to be in your market and is going to embrace it. But yeah, I think in a vacuum, it will make it a little bit more challenging for these smaller market teams to land star players. But at the same time, I don't think it's impossible. I know I'm always up for a good challenge. So I think it's one of those things, like I said, we'll continue to adapt and figure it out.
Jeff, Kon Knueppel, the runner-up for Rookie of the Year with you out of Duke, 18 points a game as a rookie, really impacted winning with you. Walk me through the evaluation process in selecting him and kind of how your staff viewed him through the year. And then as you got to be able to know him, spend some time with him. And was there any level of surprise in the organization of how dramatically he impacted the organization as a rookie? You thought he might get to that down the road, but walk us through how you landed him and kind of the process that got you there.
Yeah, I'll start just kind of our overall philosophy, when it comes to the draft and just acquiring players in general, I would say is just kind of, eyes, ears, numbers, eyes meaning from a scouting standpoint. Of course, you want to lean on that, and then ears meaning intel. We place a premium on background and character and just the person, right? Not just the player, the person that we would be bringing into the organization. And then, of course, numbers refers to analytics. So you have all these different again sectors, if you will, and when they kind of align, that's something that gives you confidence. So we saw Kon early on, even before the season started. Saw him, in the summer at a Duke workout, and initially it's like, man, this guy's, he's interesting. I'm not going to go as far as to say he'd be a top 5 pick at that point, but like he's interesting. And one of the two things I should say that stood out right off the bat: his competitiveness and his IQ or / ability to process the game. So of course you continue to get several different evaluations throughout the season. You're watching him, scouts are watching him, I'm watching him. It's like, man, no, he's actually really good. Not just interesting, he's actually really, really good. And, we were fortunate that the ACC tournament was here, that season, and Cooper Flag unfortunately had an injury, and Kon, they put the ball in his hands even more, and he was able to shoulder the load. And again, that was just another layer to the whole thing. That the guy's fiercely competitive, and he wanted that challenge, which was very encouraging to see. So. You do all the evaluation, and then you get to the Chicago Combine in May, and that's the first time that we're allowed to actually speak with prospects, which is, to me, is the best part of the evaluation period, because you get to know these guys as human beings. And I mean, this guy loves basketball. I can't tell you how serious he takes it, and he's a historian of the game. He loves basketball is the easiest way to say it. So, again, we had a ton of confidence in him at that point. And then when he came to Charlotte for an individual workout, again, his skills weren't displayed, but, Charles at one point went over to him during the workout and, he said something to him. He's kind of trying to crack a joke, and Kon didn't, he didn't budge a smile. He's so locked in and treated it like a job interview. He was just, it was very impressive. So, look, we liked him a ton in the draft. We thought that he would be really, really good. We thought that he could get to this level. I don't know if we thought he would get to this level this fast, if I'm being honest. And it's just, we're very fortunate to have him as part of our organization.
Jeff, when you say he processes the game well, how do you define that with a player? What is process? What does that mean to the Hornets about processing the game well?
Yeah, I think, look, in today's age, it's gone. The game is more read and react. It's no longer, I'm going to come down the court and run punch five, and I'm going to throw it into the post, and this guy's going to back down. And, so you need, I think that the more guys that can think the game in real time and again, read and react and process the game, I think the better off you are. So of course we're constantly trying to evaluate, like, is the player simply making the right read for the team, not just for himself, right, but for his team. So could be as simple as, you drive and you beat your man and the defense collapse. I'm making the right read. I'm kicking it out. Or maybe it's to shoot the basketball. No player's perfect. Of course, they're all going to make mistakes at times, but more times than not is the player making the right decision. And again, if you watch Kon at Duke, you watch him, of course, with us. I think you could say that more times than not, he is a positive decision maker. And I think, one thing Kon and I have talked about it, a good amount too. I think one thing you could attribute it to is he grew up playing the game. He has a ton of siblings. His parents played at a high level, so he's been around the game from a long time, and just playing against older people, I think that's helped him as well, because he may not have had the physical advantage or the athletic advantage at that time when he was younger, but I think, again, it's paid dividends from just his ability to process it.
The NBA playoffs have arrived, and the best odds on basketball are on Novig. Stop paying sportsbook fees and start making your predictions on America's #1 trading app. Check out Novig and use code WOJ to get $50 worth of Novig coins when you spend your first $5. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older to play. Please play responsibly. Hey, Jeff, the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I think this has been a huge part of how rapidly this organization, since you've come in 2+ years ago, the growth, getting into the play-in this year, I think, hoping that next year you're in position to be a playoff team in the East. People talk about alignment a lot. And when you came in, you had the opportunity, to do a coaching search pretty quickly, identified Charles Lee. And I think the partnership you guys have has played a big role in this. So when people hear that term thrown around a lot, alignment, How does that show itself every day? What does alignment to you and Charles mean between a team president, GM, and his head coach?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. Charles is a close friend of mine. We've known each other. We both worked, started our NBA careers back in Atlanta, so we had some overlap there. I think at the fundamental level, Charles and I respect each other just as men, as human beings. And then the next layer, we also have a tremendous amount of respect for each other's jobs. I know his job is extremely hard. I don't want to do that job. I have no interest in doing that job. And I think he would say the same thing about my job. He knows that it's not easy and there's some challenges. So I think once you have that level of respect for one another, I think that's a tremendous way to start off a relationship. And then the biggest thing, we place a ton of emphasis on collaboration. So Charles and his entire coaching staff, they can come into any front office meeting that we have. We're not hiding anything. There aren't any silos in this organization. And conversely, I know that if I wanted to go to any of the coaches' meetings, I could pop in there as well, which I don't because I would mess the whole thing up. So, but again, I think it's just the respect for one another and the ability again for us to disagree, because we certainly have our disagreements, but at the end of the day, we know that after that disagreement, you can go get a glass of wine, or I'm going to his house to have a play date with his girls, or, whatever it is. Right. And we hang out all the time and things like that. So it's one of those things where, we addressed it on the front end, before I even hired Charles. And, one of the first things that we talked about is just, never want this stuff to come between our friendship, because the league is great. I love the NBA. I think we both love what we do. At the same time, I don't think either one of us would say that it's our identity or it's going to define us as men or anything like that. So, and we're also aware that we're both replaceable. That the league has been around for a long time and it's going to continue to go on. Whenever we're not here, and our whole thing has been just like we want to leave the Hornets in a better place than we found it. And we know that we've been blessed with a tremendous opportunity to do it together. So that's kind of been our approach. Again, very, very collaborative, knowing that there's going to be some disagreements, but it's never going to, get to the point where, you hear some of these horror stories where the GM and the coach don't talk for X amount of days or months or whatever it may be. And, I think in those instances, it's pretty apparent that typically there's not a winner in those situations, right? Everyone feels it. The players feel the tension. The rest of the staff feel the tension. Someone's probably going to get fired, if not both. So I think just, again, continue to remember that we're both on the same team. We want to get to the same place. We may disagree a little bit on how we're going to get there, but we'll figure it out. And just because how much we respect one another.
That's great. Jeff, you got a lot of work to do. 2 picks in the top 20 coming up at the end of the month. I'll let you get back to it. Thank you again for taking time to jump on. I know we'll catch up soon.
Sounds good, Adrian. I appreciate you hosting me on here, and good luck to you as well.
A big thank you to my guest this week, Charlotte Hornets President of Basketball Operations, Jeff Peterson. We'll catch you next week on the program.